GROVER, an Australian entrepreneur, created Giggle, a women-only app to give women a safe space free from online harassment from men. When a biological man sought to join, she said no. For that, she has spent 4 years and nearly $2 million in court. Her case is now before the federal court, not only for herself, but for every woman and girl who believes women deserve spaces of their own. This is not just about women. It is about any group with legitimate criteria for membership. A prostate cancer support group for men, a children's club for kids, or a miscarriage support group for women. Each exists for a reason, and that reason collapses if membership can be claimed by anyone at will. Men cannot have miscarriages, women cannot get prostate cancer, and adults certainly can't be children. Yet our Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Dr Anna Cody, paid $400,000 a year, recently told Senate estimates she did not understand the term biological man. Now, how can the nation's top official for women's rights not grasp basic biology? If she cannot define a woman, how can she defend one? I call on this government to sack Dr Cody immediately. Since 2013, gender identity has overridden sex in the law. The result is the erasure of women's rights, and Parliament must act to restore clarity, to protect single-sex spaces, services and opportunities as lawful and necessary. This is not intolerance. It is reality. It is fairness. Without sex-based rights, we cannot protect women. Gender identity must never override biological sex.
So, lots of outrage this week about the Tickle versus Giggle case in the federal court, finding against the women's-only Giggle app founder SAL GROVER in favour of trans person Roxanne Tickle for not allowing her on the app. The case led to the demise of SAL's business, but nobody cares about that or the message it sends to young female entrepreneurs about Australia or the jobs that it'll cost young people. Anywho, this all sets a precedent that women can't have women's-only spaces that exclude trans people who declare themselves to be women. And in a way, it forces all of us to go along with that, under threat of ourselves being legally held to account. I can't say right now that I don't think Roxanne Tickle is a woman. That's technically illegal. And the process, of course, is the punishment. But what lots of Aussies don't know is that we're footing the bill for a lot of this ideological warfare on behalf of the trans lobby, whether we like it or not. While Tickle paid for her own legal costs with the support of the Grata Legal Fund, which is associated with the University of New South Wales and is not government funded, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner and the Australian Human Rights Commission are taxpayer funded. And while they weren't directly arguing Tickle's case or acting for Tickle in any specific legal capacity, the Commissioner acted as a, quote, friend of the court, unquote, with the role of assisting the court on the proper construction of the relevant law. So taxpayer-funded bodies participated in the proceedings, but in an advisory capacity to the court, of course, not as Tickle's legal representatives. Anyway, the full federal court upheld and expanded the original ruling. Giggle and GROVER have to pay Tickle $20,000 in damages, as well as her legal costs, up to $100,000. The lawyers are always the winners, aren't they? GROVER has made it clear that she intends to appeal all of this to the High Court, but she first needs to be granted special leave by the High Court to do so, which is not guaranteed. This is the first major test case of gender identity protections under the Sex Discrimination Act. It might be nice if our politicians did their jobs and listened to public opinion on this stuff and change the Act accordingly. I think parties like One Nation, who make it clear how they feel about these things, will continue to win massive support. And those who flip-flop, like the wishy-washy Liberals have done for years on all of this stuff, will continue to become more and more irrelevant. Leasing land of Australia that we should all be keeping an eye on. Firstly, Sydney-based activist and head of Binary Australia, Kira Lee Smith, posted on social media about two transgender people playing in a women's football competition on the New South Wales mid-north coast. One of the players, Riley Dennis, was with the Flying Bats Football Club, which is described as a football club for, quote, self-identified women and non-binary people, quote. They play in the North West Sydney Women's Football Premier Competition. They do amazingly well. The Flying Bats won all 17 games they played in 2024, and they scored 76 goals, while only 8 goals were scored against them. Must be excellent sports women. Anyway, back to the Aussie legal system, and a New South Wales court found that Smith had incited hatred and serious contempt for the two players, and she was ordered to pay $95,000. Yes, that's right, $95,000 in fines and issue a public apology. It was a landmark decision to be celebrated. The first time that someone had been found to have unlawfully vilified a person for being transgender under New South Wales law. Her appeal in the New South Wales Supreme Court is coming up. Secondly, there's Jasmine Sussex, a Victorian breastfeeding counsellor facing proceedings before Queensland's Civil and Administrative Tribunal after posting on social media that biological males cannot breastfeed. The complaint was brought by Jennifer Buckley, a transgender woman who used drug therapy to induce lactation and breastfed her newborn child. Sussex was expelled by the Australian Breastfeeding Association over the dispute. Sussex has sought to turn the tables on Buckley by demanding that she prove that the substance expressed was breast milk, consistent with what a mother would produce and nutritious for the infant. Anyway, our tax dollars will be used to work that case out in the QCAT, and central to the case is whether this trans person can put their nipple in the mouth of a suckling infant, I presume. All very normal and natural in our modern progressive society. And finally, there's the case of Lyle Shelton, the director of the Family First Party. It was back in the Queensland Supreme Court this week, that one. This started with a complaint in Queensland's QCAT. Good old Queensland's QCAT is really involved in it. Funny that Queensland's our only Liberal National Party state in Australia, but all this stuff goes on. Anyway, Queensland's QCAT in 2020, this was first brought in by drag performers Johnny Valkyrie and Dwayne Hill. In their complaint, they claimed that Shelton vilified them in social media posts in 2019. In 2023, 3 years later, QCAT dismissed the vilification complaint, and then the drag queens decided they would appeal. The appeals tribunal found QCAT had applied the wrong legal test, so it overturned the decision. That was March this year, 2026, another 3 years. Lyle Shelton then went to the Queensland Supreme Court seeking judicial review of the appeal tribunal decision, and that is in progress right now as we speak. On all of this, I have absolutely no comment, because to have any opinion or to make any comment is dangerous in modern totalitarian Orwellian Australia. So I'll just leave it to you to make your own minds up about how the country's doing.
Well, what is a woman? Apparently, it's a very difficult question for Australia to answer. And I really do mean Australia, because the UK knows, the US knows, over the ditch in New Zealand, they're even doing better than us. I mean, just ask Anna Cody, Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner, who can't even define the first word in her title.
Lesbians, trans women, non-binary, there are a range of people who identify as women who are women.
Did you mean that biological males can be women?
Men. So I think that we have different language that perhaps you're using than I would use. So I don't understand the term biological men.
Yeah, riddle me this. We as taxpayers are funding a sex discrimination commissioner to the tune of $400,000 a year who doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman. Yes, this is the Australia we are living in. And it's all considered normal because we do not have laws that protect women, thanks to Julia Gillard, who amended the Sex Discrimination Act in 2013, removing the definitions of sex, man and woman. So basic biology is rendered useless in this country. And that is why it was so good to finally hear a politician willing to pull back the curtains on the horrors of gender ideology. Here was Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson in the Senate this week.
Frankly, too many people in positions of authority have dumped aboard the politicised and ideological trans train under the false pretences of compassion, tolerance, diversity and inclusion. The Victorian Premier, Jacinta Allan, is one such leader. Our Sex Discrimination Commissioner, which is meant to uphold sex-based rights, refuses to acknowledge biological sex. It's positively Orwellian, but we should not be surprised. The Sex Discrimination Commissioner is part of the Australian Human Rights Commission, which has now become an activist organisation.
And look, she's not wrong. How can the Sex Discrimination Commissioner claim to be an advocate for women when she doesn't even know what a woman is? And I commend Senator Henderson for speaking up. We need more politicians like this willing to come out against entrenched gender ideology. When the Senate last tried to debate restoring biological definitions in the Act in August, the Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, shut it down.
We do not agree with the Senate being a place where individual harm can be done to young people across this country. And that is what would have happened had we allowed this bill to proceed in the normal course, and we won't stand for it. Trans children deserve better from this chamber.
The Minister for Women labelled a bill to restore women's sex-based rights as harmful. Again, this is the Australia we are living in. Now, Senator Henderson was joined in Canberra this week by Giggle for Girls founder SAL Grover, who will join me later in the show, and even Greens co-founder Drew Hutton. Did we ever think we would see a day where a Greens member, or now former Greens member, is pushing for the protection of women's rights and safety? And I say former because Drew Hutton has been expelled from the party for wanting to protect the rights of women. Who would have thought the left are not so tolerant after all? But look, it points to something bigger. This is not a left versus right issue. Women's rights, the definition of a woman, it's mainstream. It's always been non-partisan, it impacts both sides of politics, and there are many on the left equally as worried about women's rights being erased. But thanks to warped gender ideology, which has been politicised, as Sarah Henderson pointed out, if you talk about it, you're labelled as some sort of bigot or far right-wing nutjob. Now, this should not be a controversial issue. I mean, it's only been controversial for 5 minutes. because politicians like Jacinta Allen have made it controversial. The Victorian Premier doesn't seem to think there's an issue with a male prisoner who raped his own child being housed in a women's prison because they now identify as a woman. Politicians like the Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, have made it controversial. The Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Anna Cody, has made it controversial. Now, perhaps these women should take a simple biology lesson from the movie Kindergarten Cop.
Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
Thanks for the tip.
Yep, it really is that simple.